Good afternoon and welcome to our live Hangout on Air by Bright Ideas Press. I am Jimmie Lanley. I'm the social media manager for Bright Ideas Press, a Christian homeschool curriculum company, and we're glad to have you with us today, whether you're watching live on the Google Plus event page, watching live via YouTube, or maybe you're watching this after the fact via the recorded YouTube video. We're so happy to have you with us, and we encourage you to leave any comments or questions you have wherever you are seeing this video. With me today, I have Tyler Hogan and Heather Woodie. And Tyler is part of Bright Ideas Press, and he is a homeschool dad of 3 children. Heather is a homeschool mom of 4 children. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you right now. So Tyler, would you please start us off?
Well, I'm Tyler Hogan. I am full-time with Bright Ideas Press. My parents, Bob and Maggie, started the company, and they homeschooled my brother and I all the way through. My brother started in about 3rd grade, and they homeschooled me K through 12. And now I'm married to another homeschool graduate and have 3 kids of my own. The oldest one just started 1st grade, and there's one more due next month. So I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you, Tyler, for that introduction, and congratulations. And everyone, today is Tyler's birthday, so happy birthday, Tyler. And he took off his birthday hat. I'm sure we'll see an appearance of that later on in the video. Heather, please introduce yourself.
I'm Heather Woodie. I blog at blogshewrote.org. I have 4 children, 2 high schoolers, 1 middle schooler, and 1 last elementary kid.
Welcome, Heather. Thank you. We're going to be talking today about using current events in your homeschool. This is one of those topics that a lot of us think, yeah, I need to be doing that. I need to be teaching my kids about what's going on in the news, in the world, and in our own national politics, but it tends to get forgotten and put to the wayside. So today, Tyler and Heather are going to give us some really practical tips for how to use current events in our homeschool without getting stressed out. So first of all, let's lay the foundation, and let's talk about why should we study current events. Most of us probably have that nagging feeling that we should, but why should we? Is there really a valid reason to include current events? So Tyler, what are your thoughts on this? Why should we?
Well, I think studying current events helps make everything else that you study a lot more real. It takes those abstract concepts that you study in something like geography, and it makes it much more concrete. If you're studying geography and you're hearing about, food sustainability or aquifers and how aquifers in the hydrosphere are important to people's survival, those are very abstract concepts. But when you read an article that says, all right, in Florida, there are aquifers where the salt water is intruding on the freshwater aquifers and it's ruining people's drinking water and crop water. Suddenly that makes the whole idea of what an aquifer is and why it's important so much more real, because you're reading about how it affects real people. And when you're reading articles about places where there are famines and food shortages, it makes those ideas about food sustainability much more important because, oh, this actually affects people's lives. I may not feel like it affects me directly, but I can see, pictures and video of other people and how it's affecting their lives. So it just takes those abstract ideas and brings them down to a very concrete level. And not just in geography, it applies to lots and lots of different subjects.
Exactly. We just know that you're a huge geography buff, so you're always going to bring everything back to that. Heather, tell us why you think current events should be part of our homeschool routine.
Well, I think it's a way to bring the real world into your homeschool, like Tyler mentioned, and it also gives a safe place for us to discuss with our kids the things that are going on around in the world. Because the kids will see headlines anywhere. They might see it come across in the grocery store. They might hear it if you happen to have something on where something comes through. It gives us a safe place to kind of decompress all of that information. And as our kids have gotten older, they ask a lot of questions. My teenagers will often say, "What's going on today? What's happened in the world today?" And it gives a chance for my husband and I to explain it to them and talk to them about it. And it also prepares our kids in just a few short years, they're going to be going off. And I had a very sobering moment when I realized my 16-year-old turns 16 tomorrow. In the next presidential election, he's going to vote. And so that seems really like a big responsibility to me.
That does bring it home. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about that, Heather. So I know a lot of homeschool moms are thinking, okay, you're right, I need to do this. I'm starting to feel the guilt. Okay, it's one more thing I'm not doing. That's not what the message we're sending. So the next question is, how in the world am I going to add this to my already overwhelmed homeschool day? I can barely get in math and language arts. How in the world am I going to add in current events? Please, how can I do this? Tyler, what do you think?
Well, for one thing, don't treat current events like a whole subject. This is not another grid to add to your Illumination schedule software. This is not something that's supposed to be burdensome to you. Think of it instead as an opportunity. Like Heather said, those headlines are around you. You can't very well shut them off completely. So think of it as just, how are we going to approach those headlines when they come up? Treat it as an opportunity rather than as a burden. I think that's really key. It's not just a whole new subject, but it's a chance to engage with your kids as they're watching the news, or as you're reading the paper, or as something's going on the radio or on TV or the internet, and they see things and they have questions. Take advantage of those opportunities.
Is that your approach too, Heather, taking more of a lifelong learner kind of approach versus a let's sit down and read this newspaper article approach?
Definitely. I try to bring it in whenever possible, when it makes sense. So, for example, my junior in high school is finishing up a course in biology, and he has to write a research paper. And this kid loves to write, but he's not a science guy. So he's trying to figure out, what is he going to pick, what is he going to write about, and what's in the headlines right now but the Ebola virus. And so we got to talking about that one night at the dinner table, and my 12-year-old said to him, well, what's the difference between Ebola and the plague from many years ago? And so that's actually what his research paper is about. He has done a lot of research to compare the numbers, what historians believe was true about the bubonic plague, compared to what's becoming an epidemic for Ebola, and that's been a way to incorporate it into work he's already doing, and gives him a sense of what's happening.
Wow, that is fantastic.
That's brilliant.
It is. I hear what you guys saying is just to capitalize on what we hear, maybe on the radio or on TV, and while we're sitting at the dinner table or we're driving in the car, we can be having these conversations. It doesn't have to be a formal academic exercise. It can just be part of our parenting and our relationship with our kids. So I think that's going to give all the homeschool moms a big sigh of relief that they don't have to, make a worksheet. You don't have to do that. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. So what is the best way to start this off? Let's get really practical. Let's say that someone wants to start this week. Tyler, how would you say do this with kids, little kids?
Well, with little kids, it's definitely trickier because a lot of the things that are going to be going on in the world are so complicated, and there's so much history and ideology behind it that with real little ones, you're going to have a harder time finding good articles that'll fit really well. So one of the things that worked well in our family was we got a subscription when I was in elementary school to a elementary news magazine. It was God's World Publications, the people who put out World Magazine. They put out magazines for elementary and junior high and high school kids. And so we got those, which is great because it's curated news that's going to be written at the right reading level and have topics that are appropriate for that age group. And that was a really good, gentle way to introduce me to studying current events and following things. So if you have a chance, you can go and find a good publication like that. And it doesn't have to be a paper publication. You can find a good blog that's aimed at that kind of age group and helping to, explain like I'm 5 and tell me what the situation is all about. So I think that would be one thing you can do, is find a good news source that you can trust with young kids.
What about your local newspaper, Tyler?
Local newspapers can be a mixed bag. Our newspaper in Delaware had a lot of great stuff, but it also had, on one page you'd have a great article about agriculture in Delaware and what the harvest is looking like this year and how that's going to affect the local economy. And right next to it, you'd have the sex scandal from, the high school teacher down the road who got caught doing something he shouldn't do. So that's a little bit trickier because it's just not curated the way you really want it to be, for at least for younger ones. By the time they're in high school, that's not so much of a problem because they're probably going to be used to seeing those kind of headlines anyway, and whether or not you want to bother reading them is up to you. So local newspapers, they can be really good, but definitely for older students, junior high and up, I'd say.
Okay. Heather, what about you? Do you have any suggestions for getting started with current events?
I do. One of the things that we would do as a family is pray before dinner. And if there's something going on in the news, even with young children, we could bring it up and say, we're going to pray for this people group, or we're going to talk a little bit about it and then why we're praying for them. And so that was just, we incorporated it into our family prayer time.
That's a great idea. And I did want to bring in Steve Blackston. He has a comment. I'm not able to bring it up on the screen, but Steve, thank you. He said the kids get a chance to learn what is going on, in the world through the parents giving them a biblical worldview. And that kind of goes into our next question, which is, how do you deal with those unsavory elements? There are things that you do want to discuss with your kids. So how do you get into current events when things aren't so pleasant? Obviously, we're talking age appropriate here, but Tyler, I know you have some thoughts on this of dealing with older kids and how do you approach these tough things?
Well, with older kids, I'd say the most important element really is your theology. You have to have a good family foundation, understanding the doctrine of sin, the nature of mankind. Yeah, a little eschatology is probably going to be useful here too. But the key with understanding the times is to keep bringing it back to the gospel. I mean, everything that we read in the news, God has something to say about. And if you keep bringing every article that you read back to the gospel, back to the cross, and ask, well, what do you think God has to say about this? What do the scriptures say? How are we supposed to interpret and understand and react to this news? What should we be doing in response to this? Does this warrant a response? Is there anything that we can do, or should this be something that we just need to be aware of and add to our prayer list? So your theology and how you approach these things is going to be absolutely crucial, because your kids are going to get a theology from the news one way or the other, and it's important that it comes from you and that you guide them in understanding that current events relate to our understanding of God and man and sin. One thing that is very tempting to do is to try and shield our kids from everything, and I'm convinced that, especially with older ones, that's really doing them a disservice, because they're going to come up with it, or they're going to come up to it eventually, and you have the opportunity as the parent of teenagers to give them the tools that they'll need to deal with it effectively. So I would say don't shy away from those unsavory things, but deal with them. Deal with them in a very heartfelt manner, deal with them in a very biblical and theologically minded manner, and I think you'll do a much better job of preparing the older ones to really deal with the news on their own, which, I mean, that's the goal, right?
Absolutely.
And as for younger ones, I think one of the things that you can do, like Heather said, is just add it to your prayer list. Our little 5-year-old girl is praying for the Christians in Iraq because she knows that there's persecution. She knows what that is, and she understands that that is a problem and that there are people over there suffering. So she prays for them. And, she may not understand all the ins and outs of everything that's going on over there. I wouldn't say I do, but she's getting started with understanding that the world is bigger than just her. And that's, for a 5-year-old, that's a big step.
So Steve likes what you're saying. He said, well said, Tyler. I think you guys are on the same wavelength there, and using those opportunities to discuss with our kids. And I would add, not just telling them what to believe, but discussing and letting them have their own opinions, and they may differ from yours, and that's okay. But a lot of kids are told what to believe about politics or current events versus having a real discussion and letting the child come to their own conclusion that hopefully you have guided and you have helped them come to that. So Heather, I know you have kids spanning the gamut from elementary to high school, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on this with the different age ranges and how you deal with those tricky parts of the news.
Well, we live in a unique little place here in central New York. So it's a very liberal town with a lot of protesting that happens on a regular basis. It's really not something we can shelter our kids from really at all. And so at least not in the same way others might. And so we have to be, because they will witness something and people on the corner, or it'll be splashed out somewhere, anywhere that they'll see, we kind of approach things from here's where we stand and here's where other people stand on this same issue. And so God's World News is something we had in our house when we were really young. My children were younger, and my oldest, he loved that. He just loved to see what was happening around the world. But it's a very biased source of news. And so as our kids got older, we definitely wanted to share, here's in our community what others might be thinking. And like you said, we help our kids to really come to where they're going to stand on it. And actually our church does a really good job from the pulpit addressing issues, not so much to tell people what to think, but to bring, like Tyler said, what the gospel has to say about it and answering what's going on in our community that everybody can see.
That's a great point to talk about local issues. And I think just like you were saying, Tyler, about making it real, something that you see and something a child sees, they're going to be a lot more interested in, a lot more naturally curious. So that's a great starting point, I think, for current events is what's going on in your own community. What are the controversies or the issues, and start there, and then you can branch out. I think sometimes we forget about our local issues. So great dialogue. Thanks, guys. And Tyler, you're getting a lot of birthday wishes and congratulations on your new baby on the event page. So I wanted you to know that. So what are our options for current events? What materials do we have? Like we've mentioned television. So let's just list all of the ways we could get news. We've got the God's World magazine. We've got television. What other resources would you guys suggest? Go for it.
Well, I have run across a few blogs that are put out by publications like the New York Times. So one of them, it's called the Learning Network, and I've posted in the event room blog posts from my own blog that lists a set of resources so you can see them there. But it is a blog that goes with the content in the New York Times. And so it is a little bit curated and also gives you a place to start. And I know CNN has one very similar, but they actually have a broadcast so that you can see it. I love the warning that they have on there that you should view it yourself before you show it to your kids. And so that's a really big one. I personally like to take my news by the headlines, and because I have such news hounds in my house, I read we're from Maryland, so I read the Washington Post online every day, and I just scan the headlines so that if somebody says, what's going on today, I can name something that's going on today. So I think as a parent, it's important for you to stay connected with current events so that you can help your kids do that. That's another aspect.
Okay.
Another good tool that is sometimes overlooked are people that you know in other places, whether they're in America or overseas. They could be expatriates, they could be missionaries, they could be government workers. Oftentimes those kinds of people are just a wealth of information, and they're really easy to overlook because they don't always have blogs or newsletters, and they may not have anything that they post publicly. But when you hear about something that's happening in another part of the world, and if you know anybody over there, make a point to send them an email and ask, hey, what do you think about this? This is what my headline says. How does this affect you? How does this affect the people in your community? And what's the rest of the story that my headline may not be telling me? We have a lot of missionary friends all over the world, and many of them are great about sending either weekly or monthly newsletters telling us what their missions team and the people in their country are experiencing. And a lot of those are tied to pleas for help and asking for money for different projects. But that's fine. Even if we can't give to everything, it's still good for us to know, oh yeah, we heard about that disaster, or oh, we heard about that dictator and what's going on over there, and oh, that's how it looks street level. A lot of times when we read the headlines, we get the media version, and it lacks that personal touch that actually hearing from people who are over in those situations can bring. That's been really valuable for us.
That's a great point, and I think another way you can expose your children to that is to invite those people to your home. Anytime you have an opportunity, cook a meal for those people and bring them into your home and let your kids meet them and interact with them and get to know them. So Susan shared a comment. She said, our family, and this is right along with what you said, Tyler, our family also finds that our ministry engagement opens yet another door to understanding world issues in an especially personal way as we pray for and support children around the world. So yeah, ministry is another great way, which is what you're saying. And Tisha also says that supporting missionary overseas helps her kids to be more interested in those geographical areas and the news that happens in those areas. Absolutely. I know I lived abroad many years, and the parts of the newspaper I always zero in on the international section. If there's anything in Asia, my eyes go straight to it because I've been to those countries, and when I read the story, I can see those people in my mind's eye. So it makes a huge difference when we can personalize it. That's wonderful. So we've got newspapers, magazines, online articles, online video, TV news. We've got all these resources, and I want to encourage everyone to check out Heather's post on blogshewrote.org. It is a fantastic post and really would be a great starting point for anyone who wants to begin with current events. Tyler, did you have something you wanted to say there?
No, just that, all of those different resources that you list, they're all good. Don't feel bad if you don't do everything. There's so many resources out there and so many news sources out there. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have any trouble finding something good, but don't feel bad if you're not taking advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. That's a quick way to burn out. And another thing to consider as you're looking at those different sources is, like Heather was saying, consider the bias. Mm-hmm. And it's healthy. It's usually not fun, but it's healthy to read things that are going to be coming from sources that you disagree with, even vehemently, because you need to be able to understand what those opposing views are and how they express themselves, rather than the caricature that you often hear about in your circles about how the other people think. It's good to hear it straight from the horse's mouth and not to get it through a oftentimes vilifying caricature that can just be really damaging, especially if you know people who are from that, that other side of the political fence. And, if they were to listen to the thoughts that go through our heads as we hear these caricatures, they would say, no, that's not what we think at all. You guys clearly don't understand anything that we're trying to say, and that can be really frustrating for people. So if you want your kids to be able to interact with a wide variety of ideas, use a wide variety of news sources from a wide variety of biases. One other thing that I would say regarding that is to make sure that you get some positive news in addition to the negative news, because there are so many problems in the world. It can be so easy to fixate on all of the issues and all of the difficulties and all of the injustices, and there's a definite benefit to that, because it makes us aware of things that we need to be aware of and get us active in things that we need to be active in. But there's also a strong danger to only getting negative news, because it can leave you depressed. It can leave you anxious. It can leave you and your kids thinking, there's nothing good in the world. Let's just hold on tight until Jesus gets back. And, if you're convinced that the world is going to hell in a handbasket and there's nothing left on this earth that's worth pursuing, that causes some significant emotional problems. And that's not what Jesus wants us to do. You know, we're here to be in the world, to be redeeming our culture and not just hiding from it. So make sure in the middle of all of the stuff that you're reading that you try and make sure that, you know, for every few negative articles that you read, that you pepper them with some, hey, this is really great and there's progress being made in this area, and look at the justice that's being served over here. And I think that that goes a long way to encouraging students not just to feel downcast about the world all the time, but to realize that they can make a difference in things, and that if they want to be involved in something, it can make an impact. I think a lot of the problem with reading so much negative news is that you end up feeling like there's nothing you can do, and you feel helpless and hopeless. And if you have a melancholy disposition already, that can be a really dangerous place. So make sure that you sprinkle in some lighter stuff.
Very wise advice, Tyler. Well, we are going to be wrapping up with some final words of advice. So, Heather, I would like to know, what do you think are some common mistakes that parents might make when trying to include current events, you know, how they could avoid those?
Well, I would say one of the biggest is choosing material that is emotionally too much for your children. So making sure that whatever you're choosing, the resources or even just the news stories, you want to make sure that the content is something that they can handle. And for high school students, I think just not doing it is probably the biggest mistake. Not approaching it, not making sure that, you know, while you still have influence, you know, because every year your children get older, the less influence you really have over them. And in just a few years, they're gone. And then they're out and they have their own opinions. And you want them to arrive at their own with strong influence from you, so that when they arrive there, they have a good foundation and they're ready and they can defend their own opinions in the world.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much. Steve says kids and adults do need the positive things as well. Otherwise, we all start to feel overwhelmed. Yeah, we agree with you. And Angela says, great point, Tyler, about taking positive news, both local and global. So they like your comments, Tyler. So, Tyler, what other mistakes would you say are common or things that we need to avoid when we're starting to use current events in our homeschool?
Well, like Heather said, the biggest danger is just not doing anything. And the biggest reason that people don't do anything is just because they feel overwhelmed. They feel like they have to do it perfectly, or they better not do anything at all. And that is a lie. That is just a lie. Better a little done imperfectly than a perfect thing that never happens. And I've seen so many times in my own life, whether it's in homeschool or work or relationships or anything, just put a little bit into it. It's better than nothing. It really is better than nothing. And you'll find that those little things that may seem like they're not very much or like they're not going to add up to anything become really valuable, especially over time. So don't let your perfectionism get in the way. And don't feel like you have to turn everything into a unit study. You know, there are so many opportunities for great unit studies when you look at current events, but you don't have to take them all. You have way more opportunities in front of you than you can ever possibly hope to take advantage of. So pick and choose. Do the things that you think you can do, and just enjoy. Get a little bit done. Just get a little bit done, and you'll get a lot out of it.
That is wonderful advice, Tyler and Heather. Thank you both so much for all this wonderful wisdom. So we're just going to close here with the thoughts of taking it one step at a time, keeping it conversational, using real-life experiences, whether things we hear or see in real-life news, and using those as talking points with our kids. Informal is okay, imperfect is okay, but engaging with our kids and exposing them to current events through a biblical worldview and through other worldviews as well, always analyzing those and being clear about people's biases when we read the news or hear the news. So I want to thank everybody out on the event page for your comments and your questions and your support, and want to again say happy birthday to Tyler Hogan. Today is his birthday. And we want to encourage all of you to visit brightideaspress.com. It is a homeschool curriculum publisher. It is a Christian company, and you can be assured that the things you buy on brightideaspress.com do come from that biblical Christian worldview. We also have a blog, brightideaspress.com/blog, and we'd love for you to subscribe there and receive encouragement and practical tips from the homeschool moms that write. Please circle us on Google+. Please follow us on YouTube. We also have a very active Facebook community, and we're on Twitter and Pinterest. We're almost everywhere. We're even on Instagram, so you can follow us there at Bright Ideas Team. Thank you again for being with us, and if you have any questions about Bright Ideas Press curriculum, get in touch with Tyler. You can call the Bright Ideas Press store. They have an actual location in Delaware, and they will be happy to walk you through any of your questions about things like the Mystery of History, Illuminations, Christian Kids Explore, All-American History, Wonder Maps, and the brand new released high school geography curriculum that Tyler wrote called North Star Geography. Thanks again for being with us today, and we'll see you again next month, the second Tuesday of the month. Bye, everybody.